Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam. Wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsani ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. So we'd like to welcome you all to week number 12. Week number 12 in chronological order, but in reality, it's probably about 16 or 17 weeks with the who knows. But chronologically, we're in week number 12 of covering the 40 Hadith of Imam an-Nawawi. And we have mentioned in one class that Imam Nawawi's book is so famous that whenever you say 40 Hadith or al-Arba'ah, of the many collections of Hadiths out there, everyone knows that when you say al-Arba'ah or the 40 Hadith, you're referring to Imam Nawawi's Hadith, collection of Hadith. And so he collected a number of 42 hadith actually that deals with some very key principles in Islam. So last week, anybody remember the two principles that we covered?
I wasn't in last week's class.
Okay, all right, well, no worries. But someone else was, I think. Sister Newton, were you here last week?
Yes, I was, but I cannot recall.
Okay.
And that is the answer.
That is an answer. Okay, alhamdulillah. So last week we covered the hadith with the Prophet ﷺ. He said, La yukminu ahadakum hatta yuhibbu li nafsi ma yuhibbu li akhihi. No, excuse me. La yukminu ahadakum hatta yuhibba ma li akhihi ma yuhibbu li nafsihi. That none of you believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And so this hadith was related by Anas ibn Malik. Anybody remember the virtues of Anas ibn Malik? Who was he? So Anas ibn Malik is reported that he was the last Sahaba to die. And how many children did he have? Or how old was he when he passed? I know he lived to be over 100 years old. I think it was said he lived to be 120. Allah knows back, but it was definitely over 100 years old. And he had a number of children and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren that numbered over 100 as well. And so he was a companion that when he was a little boy, about 9 years old, his mom put him in the care of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was in his care until the time he passed. And then till the Prophet ﷺ passed, and he said never once did the Prophet ﷺ ever say, why didn't you do this? Or why did he never scolded him or reprimanded him in a normal way that you would do it? Imagine a 9-year-old kid and all the stuff they get into. And you have to constantly keep, correcting them and advising them and checking them out. So the Prophet ﷺ had made dua for him to, have wealth and to have an abundance of children. And that's exactly what happened. And so when we talk about loving for your brother what you love for yourself, what is the actual meaning of that? So there's a concept that's called ethar. It's actually preferring your brother and your sister over yourself. Loving for them what you love for yourself is loving more for them, than you would even your own self, giving them preferential treatment. And there's an ayah in the Quran which says that the believers that they prefer their brothers over themselves. And we gave the example about how the Ansar and the Muhajirun, when the migrants from Mecca came to Medina, the Ansar would treat them like brothers, even one of them opting to divorce one of his wives so that his brother could marry him, And the next hadith we talked about where the blood of a Muslim is sacred except in three matters. Anybody remember what those three matters are? Okay, so the three matters is in the case of adultery or fornication, murder that is without right, or someone who has left the deen. And so, what do we mean by leaving the deen? Does it mean that someone who stopped praying or stopped practicing? Yeah, you can answer too.
No.
No, it has to be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they actually believe and are conscious about that they no longer believe in Islam. That's the difference between falling short in practice or not praying. And scholars differ over if they stop praying like out of negligence or heedlessness or laziness, that does not take them out of Islam. But if a person believes that the prayer is no longer an obligation on them, then this would be something that would take them outside of Islam, right? Or disbelieving in any of the pillars of Islam. And we mentioned last week about Abu Bakr Siddiq, when he fought against the people who decided that they weren't going to pay their zakat. He went to war with them. And then we mentioned that a life for a life, in some cases, a person's life can be taken under Islamic law. And if it's it has to be by, if a person does it by right, then the family has if someone's killed someone unjustly, not by right, then the family has the right to take their life, or they can have what's called qisas, or like letting them go, or diyah. In the instance where it was unintentional, then the person has to pay blood money. All right. So qisas means like retaliation. All right. And then we talked about a person. What happens if a person leaves the salat and then they just say, "I'm no longer going to pray"? What would be the punishment? Yeah, they would be put
What
to
was the
death.
question?
If a person just decided they're not going to pray and they say, "I don't believe it, I have to offer salat," that it's not an obligation on me. I don't believe in that no more, right? So can they just be killed right away?
No, you have to find like evidence, or you have to make sure, like, be sure, have them be sure of it.
Yeah, you have to check to make sure they're in their right frame of mind, that there were no factors that like disrupted their mental state, that they're not under any influence or any coercion. And some scholars say that they would be locked away for 3 days, and each day reminding of the virtues of salat, that kind of thing. And if they still after 3 days still saying that they don't believe it, then they ought to be put to death. So what about adultery and fornication? What's the punishment? Well, for adultery,
Isn't it like lashes or something, or stoned?
no, lashing is for fornication, but adultery is stoning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and even though this seems barbaric, this is also serves as a deterrent, and not like the society that we live in, that crime is allowed to go on because it makes a lot of money for some people. You know, it's yeah. The United States government is getting rich off of crime, and it's no coincidence that many of our people are locked up. In truth, I think the American prison system has over 2 million inmates, and at least more than 50% of them are African American, while they make up a small part of the society. In any society, uh, the people who represent the society the most are supposed to represent them across all categories. For instance, if a society has 75% like this one of white people, then they're supposed to dominate every category, but they only dominate the ones in wealth and education, everything that's good. And we dominate the ones of poverty, lack of education, all of these kind of sicknesses. And so there's a divine design, to keep us poor and uneducated, And may Allah give them what they deserve for doing this intentionally to people. I mean, okay, so we talked about that. And so tonight, I was going to try to cover two hadith, but we're just going to cover one, inshallah. So tonight, we'll be covering the 15th hadith in Sahih, in the Imam Nawawi's book. Okay. All right, so can you all see that? I didn't put it up on the screen. Okay, so Hadith 15, I'm going to read the Arabic, inshallah. So this is Hadith is an Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu anna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam qala man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyataqul khayra aw liyasmut wa man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyukrim jarahu wa man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyukrim dayfahu. And this is in Bukhari and Muslim. So would anybody like to read the English, inshallah?
I'll read it. Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, narrated that the Prophet, may Allah bless him and give him peace, said, if someone believes in Allah and the last day, let him speak good or remain silent. If someone believes in Allah and the last day, let him honor his neighbor. If someone believes in Allah and the last day, let him honor his guest.
Okay, Abdullah, shukran. Okay. All right, so now there's have a discussion of this hadith. So here the Prophet ﷺ is discussing three matters. The matter of the three matters that bring together good manners, both in word and deed, are related to external actions, right? And so the matters are remaining silent or speaking good, being good to your neighbor, and being hospitable to your guests. And so here, already off the bat, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned belief in Allah on the last day with each matter. So he could have easily said, you know, وَمَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ, and then he could have said the rest, فَيَقُولْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ, and then he could have said فَيُكْرِمْ جَارِهِ, and then he could have said فَيُكْرِمْ ضَيْفِهِ. That he could have just said those, but he said فَمَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ each time before he said those. And so that shows the significance of how important it is because they're connected with faith. They're connected with Iman. All right. And so here's a principle that we learn as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah with respect to Iman. The actions are not of a condition of Iman. Anybody remember when we covered that in the Jawhar at-Tawheed? What do we mean that actions are not a condition of Iman?
Like you have to have the intention along with the action?
Yeah, but you don't necessarily, the actions are not a shart. It's not a condition. So the condition to have Iman is tasdeeq in the heart and to a saying on the tongue, right? And then the other part where the working with the body parts, that is not a condition, that's for completion. So if a person has enough in his heart that they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is sufficient as belief, and the uttering on the tongue is also a confirmation. And so if a person never did a righteous act in their life, would they still be a believer?
Wait, repeat that question.
If a person never did a righteous deed in their life and they uttered the shahada, would they still be a believer?
Yes.
Yes. What you know a proof for that?
Not off the top of my head. Is it like another hadith or something?
Yeah, there is a hadith.
I don't recall the hadith, but
Okay.
I know that there is one, possibly.
Okay. You said probably?
I don't want to say for sure, and then I say the wrong thing.
Okay, no worries. So there's a hadith about a man, he had accepted Islam, and he had went right into battle and he died. And so he did not he did not do any prayers, he did not do any righteous actions. And that's one of the proofs that, describes that a person, if they actions are complete your iman, but it's not a condition for you to have iman. All right. And that's called ikmal. So, but if you want iman to be complete, they require actions. And so that's what this hadith is alluding to. Like, if you want your iman to be complete, and so the Prophet ﷺ, whoever believes in Allah, like seriously, then they would do these things. That's like the meaning of these three things. Then you would speak well or be quiet. You would take care of your neighbors, and you would be hospitable to your guests. And so it's connected to faith here, even though actions are not a condition of iman. All right. But to complete iman, you require actions, right? Is that clear? Any questions?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next thing. So the first thing the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned about speaking good or being quiet. And so it's basically either or. If you believe in Allah on the last day, you either say something that's good or be quiet. Only yasmut. He said, or to remain silent, refrain from talking. And plunging into speech without caution is a cause of destruction, and guarding the tongue is the path to success. And so a person, if they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the last day, they should speak when there's a need. And when they do speak, they should speak with substance and purpose, with good articulation and not just trivial stuff. And it is recommended to even minimize permissible speech. And it is recommended to even things that are allowed to talk about, don't talk about them in extension. There was a hadith about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. It said that he used to put frankincense in his mouth to stop himself from talking. And then the Prophet ﷺ, there are a number of hadith about the harms of the tongue, that a person, one of the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, will we really be punished by what we say? And he said, a person will be dragged on their face in hellfire by what comes out of their mouth. And so that's humiliation, I mean, if you think about being dragged on anything, your back, side, or face, that's like, just imagine, like, you see all these videos, if somebody stomps somebody out and then they drag them, that's like extra stuff. Like, that's going beyond it, right? Now imagine being this humiliation and being in hellfire because of things that we've said. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guard our tongues. And so here, this is related by Ibn Umar, and this is in the collection of Tirmidhi, that the Prophet ﷺ said, do not talk too much without remembrance of Allah. Indeed, excessive talking without remembrance of Allah hardens the heart. And indeed, the furthest of people from Allah is the one who have hard hearts. And so it is recommended for us to remain quiet or say something or think about the words that we're going to speak before we speak them. And, all of the things connected to that, do not speak without knowledge, do not speak without any purpose, And so silence is golden. And there's another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about, a person will be judged, he said the worst thing, what's the worst thing? And the Prophet ﷺ pulled out his tongue and he said this, meaning the tongue, that's the most harmful action. Because things that, when words are said, they can't be taken back. And words can they can scar like weapons, All right. Any questions on that?
No.
Alhamdulillah. So he talked about silence. The first thing, either say something good or remain silent. And even in saying something good, you should restrict that because too much talking, And, there used to be a song back in the day, a rap group called Run DMC. I know y'all too young to remember that stuff. They had a song called You Talk Too Much. Why don't you ever shut up? And just imagine people who talk too much. I'm always leery of people who talk too much, because somewhere down the line, and this is one of the wisdom, you're going to have to say something that you got to remember. Most of the time people be lying or they be capping, and then they can't remember the cap that they said. And so these people are not trustworthy for the most part. So I was always leery of people who talk too much, and then just, people who talk too much, they be annoying, Okay, then the next thing is about being honorable to the neighbor. And so here, the neighbors, they have a right over you, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, righteous or wicked, friendly or obnoxious, that the person who believes in Allah on his last day, you have to suffer their harms and you do not harm them. Now you can imagine some of the neighbors that we've encountered, people who are, don't give anything about your rights. They don't care about noise. Even if you have a neighbor that they might be doing something, you feel like going on, knock on the door, could you keep that noise down? You can't even do that, because it's connected to belief in Allah and belief in the last day, that you do not harm the neighbor. And what's considered a neighbor? So Allah mentions in the verse, it said that the one who is near and the one who is distant. And so generally it's about seven households each way. So not just your immediate neighbor, anybody within your vicinity, within your eyesight is considered your neighbor. Right? And so how does that extend? Most times we consider our next door neighbor, on either side, if we have those, but I know most of y'all live in those gated communities and exclusive places where, it's just y'all, it's a long driveway before you get up there. But for us down here in the low parts, we got neighbors all over the place. We often remember, my wife and I, we always have to remind ourselves of this, because we have a neighbor, once in a while, and more than once in a while, they have parties. So we in the hood, and so they throw parties to like 2, 3 in the morning. And, we not once have we ever went over there and be like, you got to work tomorrow. Because, that's annoying. You got to work and the people outside and they don't got no kind of responsibility. And that's annoying. But we can't say anything to them because they have a right. And so the neighbor doesn't have a right if they're nice to you. If they don't speak to you, you got to speak to them. So the Prophet ﷺ is narrated by Abu Shuraih that the Prophet ﷺ said, by Allah, he does not believe. By Allah, he does not believe. By Allah, he does not believe. And it was said, who was that, O Allah's messenger? So he said, the person whose neighbor does not feel safe from his evil. And so it's not the duty of the neighbor to make themselves be safe from you. As you as the believer, and knowing this, doing these narrations, it is on you to keep, you have to suffer their harms and keep their harms away from you. Even where if you got to go and you did something or something was going on, you might have to go and apologize to your neighbor, be like, yeah, we was a little out of pocket last night. So if you heard anything, we apologize. And, places where we come from, how many of us are really going to do that? But now you think about the Prophet ﷺ connected this to Iman, not just believing in Allah and the last day, about the day when you're going to be held accountable for everything that you did. It's something to think about. So neighbors can almost get away with murder, not actual murder, because, you have some neighbors that do these things. And it's a good idea the etiquette is to reach out to your neighbor, like know who you're living around. Sometimes, and this is etiquette in America, at least, when you move to a neighborhood, you check out who lives there. What kind of neighbors you're going to be moving into, because you never know what kind of people are out there doing whatever. So it's good to know your neighbors, right? Especially as Muslims, because, there were incidents where Muslims were being targeted, when the FBI was trying to get people, Muslims, and all of the scaring. Their neighbors were vouching for them because they knew that their neighbors, they were hospitable. They took care of them. They didn't make a lot of noise. They checked on them. They watched their houses when they were away and all that kind of stuff. So these are things that really help to complete our Iman, and so all of us go through bouts of, we feeling low, we feeling depressed, or I don't, but do things like this. Go knock on your neighbor's door and ask them, listen, I'm going to the store. Is there anything that you need? Yeah, we'll be out of town, or let me know when you go out of town. So I'll make sure that you put your trash out, stuff like that, And you'd be surprised at how how your neighbor will look out for you. And even nowadays, one of the biggest things is people taking Amazon packages. Be nice to your neighbor. Your neighbor will come to your aid. And we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen. And so there's a story about Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, and his neighbor. Anybody know the story about Imam Abu Hanifa?
Is that where he would like go to his neighbor every day or something like that?
No, not that one. What's you got one? What's that one? Relate that to us.
Oh, I don't think I could do that. But I remember hearing a story about there was a man and there was like something with his neighbor where he would go to his neighbor every day, or he would like bring food or something.
Mm,
But I don't recall like all the details.
okay. So at least with this narration, there was a neighbor that Imam Abu Hanifa used to have. So when he used to pray to Hajj prayer, the neighbor would be up, he would be drinking and singing poetry, like love songs, right? So what we call that, he was going through it. He's probably in love with some girl or some woman. She done broke his heart. She didn't wrote him we used to call it, get a Dear John letter. It's over. I don't love you no more. He was heartbroken. He was listening to the equivalent of, Tony Braxton of his day or whatever R&B artist you want to choose. He was out there, going through it. And he used to do it every night. And he used to bother Imam Abu Hanifa because, imagine those houses where they're on top of each other. There's no soundproof windows or anything like that or stuff like that. And so you hearing just imagine living next to a neighbor and you can hear everything that's going on. Some of us, we live in those situations. I mentioned my neighbor earlier. We live in, connected houses where you can hear the stuff sometimes going on, and you wondering, what the hell are they doing this time in the morning, right? And so then the authorities one time came and took the neighbor away. And so when Imam Abu Hanifa, when he didn't hear the noise, he was wondering what happened to him. And somebody told him that, they took him to jail. Maybe he had some type of disturbing the peace thing. Maybe some other neighbors like, man, tired of this guy, because just imagine you live in the houses close to each other and everybody hear him singing, like on, like on that scene from Coming to America where Eddie Murphy was to be loved. And they was all like, shut up. I know y'all too young to remember that movie too, so I'm telling my age. So and then when the neighbor, he didn't hear the noise anymore, he inquired about what happened to him, and then they told him that he was, they took him to jail, and so he went down there to the jail. So Imam Abu Hanifa was like, the equivalent of a diplomat during that time. So he went down there. They like, what you doing out here? Basically, he said, I came to check on my neighbor. And because it was Imam Abu Hanifa, he went to vouch for him. They let him free, and his neighbor ended up accepting Islam. His neighbor ended up accepting Islam. So just for just from him being nice to him, or putting up with his harms, even when you feel like you have a right to do it, don't go to your neighbors, because then you see the harms of, when people fighting with neighbors that have no etiquettes, and that messes up the neighborhood. But that was a very good story. So Imam Abu Hanifa really understood that Iman is connected to treating your neighbors kind. Any questions on that? And there's a number of hadith. I want to see if any of you know one offhand about the rights of the neighbors. You all don't have to answer at once.
You said, do we know any stories off the top of our head?
Yeah, just one like hadith in general about the rights of neighbors.
No.
It has to do with the
I don't
angel
know
Jibril.
any.
About the angel Jibril. Anybody know that connected?
No.
Is that the one where you with a higher?
No, that's not it. Mm-mm. Anybody want to take a shot before I give the answer? And y'all was waiting for me to give you the answer. Y'all wasn't going to try it anyway. I'm just joking.
You said with the angel Jabril and his neighbor?
No, it's something that's connected with the angel Jibril.
Oh.
And so the brother in the class, he's Googling everything. So his answer is not admissible.
Look at my note.
So there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the angel Jibril alayhi salam used to remind him so much about the rights of neighbors that he thought that they would be able to inherit from him.
Yeah, like
Is that what you said?
yeah, I can't pronounce it. Higher.
Huh?
H-E-I-R.
Oh, an heir. Oh, he
Heir,
did.
heir.
Okay, he
Yeah.
did say it right. An heir. Okay, yeah. He thought the neighbors would be an heir, so one who has a right to your inheritance.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. I didn't really hear him say it.
Yeah.
Okay. So he said that he would remind the angel Jibril would remind him so much about the rights of neighbors that he thought that they would be heirs or inheritors, to what you leave behind. And of course, in your heirs, the person you leave behind it has to be family. So neighbors are like family, and you have to treat them as such. So they have the same rights or similar rights. All right, any questions on that? So you got to be the Islamic version of Mr. Rogers. No. All right, any questions on that or?
No questions here.
Okay. All right, so I'll go to the next slide. So we talked about the being silent, the rights of the neighbors, and then the next thing is about the guests. Pastor Islam said, وَمَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَيُكْرِمْ ضَيْفِهِ. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day. So, and these sentences are conditional. He mentioned each one. So, it's like not whoever believes in Allah on the last day. If you believe in Allah on the last day, like you say, then be kind, be noble to your guests, be noble to your neighbors, and to say something good or be silent. And so the guests, and then the hospitality is recommended, but it's not an obligation, but connected to the completeness of faith. So you're not obligated to take someone in your home and have them stay the night and stuff like that. But hospitality is recommended. If you bring someone in your house, you treat them well, and it's connected to the completion of faith. Although it's not a condition for faith, but it's connected to the ikmal or the completeness of faith. So if you ever want to increase your faith, do these things because they help you to be selfless. These acts help you to be selfless, and that increases you in iman, And so hospitality to the guests, it involves primarily feeding them, So if you have someone over, make sure you have some food, even more than one's family, So when you feed your guests, they get preferential treatment, right? Making polite conversation, putting them at ease, asking them how's their well-being, what's going on in their lives, and try to make yourself at service to them. And then the verse from the Quran, it says, and certainly did our messengers come to Ibrahim with good tidings. They said peace, and he said peace, salam. And he did not delay in bringing them a roasted calf. And in Arabic, it says, the ijlin hanid, wa ma labitha, that he did not hesitate. The first order of business after he gave them salams is he brought them a roasted calf. Now, just imagine in those days and times, they didn't, even nowadays, the roasted calf, it's going to take some time. So they'll open fire, they got to gather wood, they got to make sure the fire is right. So it's an indication that they already had a roasted calf that they have for their family, right? And said, right, for Ma Labitha, he did not wait, And then it's interesting here, this word ijlin, it says hanid is like a roasted calf, but this word ijl comes from a word to be hurried, to hurry up, So it's almost, and I don't know how that's connected, but that just shows you the divine wording of the Quran, that he brought them a roasted calf. So a roasted calf meaning like he didn't just lay out, he didn't give them no oodles or noodles. He didn't just give them anything. He gave them the best of what they had, which is an indication of the verse that they were already preparing that for their meal. And a roasted calf, that's what's the stuff that's called that Easter sells? Brisket. Yeah, brisket. Any of those things you got to roast. That stuff takes time and preparation. And just imagine, you can think now, like if you had to roast a calf or any kind of animal, how much you go through, and you like, I can't wait to dig into this meat. This meat is gonna be falling off the bone. And then he went right away and gave it to his guests. And these are people that he didn't know. Now, just imagine, he didn't know these people, because in another part of the Quran, he mentions that he was apprehensive of them because he never seen them before. But yet he still went and gave them the hospitality that was due to them. Right? And so that's how we have to be, inshallah ta'ala, and following Ibrahim alayhi salam. This is things that how he got the title Khalilullah. He was the friend of Allah, the intimate friend of Allah who subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the guests, they have a right for royal treatment for the first day and night. And the next 2 nights they get regular treatment. So the first night you have a guest, a day and a night, they have a right for that in general. Although the host still has the right to deny someone, but if they want to get their iman up, they invite them over the first night. It's like, you should treat them like they're in a 5-star hotel, have everything laid out. Then after the next 2 days, it's just regular, like you feed them the same way you would feed your family. The first night you would feed them better than you do your family. And after 3 days, the host has the right to tell the guest that it's time to go, Mr. Albert. I put Mr. Albert in parentheses. Time to go, Mr. Albert, and the guest has the right. And the guest, and I put here the guest is supposed to say, the guest also has a responsibility to not overstay their welcome. And so, this thing becomes awkward, if you ever visited family and, in the society that we live in, we don't even like to be a burden on somebody. So what's the culture here when we go visit family? If you go visit your family out of town or out of state, what would you do? You'll call them. But as far as arrangements, what would you do normally?
Sofa.
Okay, yeah, sofa. But what's another option that people mostly do? Yeah, get a hotel. Because that's our culture is kind of like you don't even want to, it's your family, but I don't want to be in the house like that. You know what I mean?
Black people not doing.
Huh?
Black people sleep on the sofa.
Yeah, I mean, some people will sleep on the sofa, but some people, because they understand etiquette, that they don't want to be a burden on the host. Even if it's their family, they might get a hotel if they stay there. But after 3 days, and you can put it to the test. We often go every year we visit my wife's family at least twice a year, and they have a nice accommodation. They have everything laid out. And the first night we get down there, it'd be like love, it's like relaxing. And then the next 2 days is like, yes, yeah, you know what it's at, right? We have a dinner, everything be laid out, like, man, the next night, what the refrigerator is, the microwave, you heat it up.
Yeah.
This is in that bowl, this is in that bowl. And then the third day is like, we usually leave, we usually don't stay more than 2 nights because it's, it just becomes burdensome, and you don't want to put your host through any kind of unnecessary hardship, And so, and then the opposite of it is when somebody overstays their welcome, then it can cause animosity between, because how do you tell your guests, it's time to go? You know, I mean, you could be nice about it, but it depends on what kind of guest. And this is an indication also of what kind of people you should be involved with. You know, you should be involved with people who, because you extend hospitality to them, they don't take advantage of it. You know, they don't take advantage of it. So that means how we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us to be with those people who are the muttaqeen, and be with the people who are sadiqeen, be with the people who are righteous, Because I'm pretty sure all of you probably had some experience with someone overstayed their welcome, and and even the etiquettes in when we were growing up, if you went over somebody's house, you didn't look around their house, you didn't say anything, you didn't be obvious. And then, if you ever had those kind of people in your house, the first thing is like, man, they ain't got no kind of home training. They looking around to see what you got or touching stuff. And, I remember my mom even was telling us, don't even eat over people's house, So, but yeah, so it's a blessing on the guest. On the host, and the guest also has a right to understand when they overstay their welcome. I was thinking about, I always like to use these TV references, right? Yeah, you all remember this show. It was called Three's Company. You remember Three's Company? Oh, we got a young in here. He don't remember Three's Company. So
I know Three's Company.
Oh, my daughter knows it. She's younger than you, so But Three's Company was there was an incident where Jack Tripper had saved a man's life where he was supposed to have choking on the chicken bone in the restaurant. And so the man had promised him, like, he had these paradise towers that he was building. He was going to like move Jack and them in there. So they brought him over and they was treating him real well, right? And come to find out he was a scam artist. That was his hustle. Like he would, go to restaurants, fake like he choking on the chicken bone to get people to, save him. They would take him home, feed him, and that's how he got his meal and got out of paying his check. And at the end of the episode, he was like, I'm sure there's a paradise towers out there somewhere. And then he just left. Yeah, Jack, Chrissy, Snow, and Janet, right? And so he was like, I'm sure there's a paradise towers out there somewhere for you. Just not with me. But at least he didn't overstay his welcome. He ate the food and he was enjoying, because Jack was a chef, right? So Jack laid it out for him because he was, because Boy made himself seem like he was like, he was made, like he was gonna get paid, you know what I mean? And come to find out, I think Larry came with somebody, and they understood that that's what he did for a living, hustle people out of for a meal. I thought it was funny anyway, so I don't know y'all. But it was just an example of people, someone who's a bad guest. Okay, Tayyip. So I was hoping to cover 2 hadiths today, but we just covered 1 hadith, number 15. And inshallah, we'll try to get 16 and 17 next week. So are there any questions before we conclude?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you and good night.
Okay. All right. Mashallah. Okay. So how about, are you all good?
I'm good over here.
No questions.
Okay. Anything, Celine? I guess she's good. All right, so if no questions, inshallah, to be there, we ask Allah, who's subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make us those people who firmly believe in the law on the last day and make these actions of speaking good or remaining silent, honoring our guests and our neighbors, make this as a means to increase our iman by doing these actions to complete our faith. We ask Allah, who's subhanahu wa ta'ala, to purify all of our efforts and accept them from us. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا أتمم لنا نورنا واغفر لنا إنك على كل شيء قدير سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة. Okay, inshallah, everyone have a great night. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.